Well, welcome to the Madison DX Club August program. My name is Kevin Shea in 9JKP, and I'd like to have Bob, our past president, W9EWZ, introduce tonight's special guest presenter. Bob.
Well, tonight we welcome Carl, K9LA, a good friend of the Madison DX Club. Carl has a master's degree in electrical engineering. He's also the director of the ARRL Central Division. Many of you probably know Carl from his many presentations on propagation, and he's done several of those for us, and you can see those on our website and our YouTube channel. But tonight he's going to present something quite different, and this is about this petition before the FCC to put up these high-power commercial trading stations, apparently in close proximity to the amateur bands. We're all very concerned about this, and we're anxious to hear what the ARRL has to offer us. So looks like we have a pretty good turnout for you tonight, Carl. So please go ahead.
Okay, let me share my screen here. Okay. Well, good evening to everyone. I'm Carl Luetzelschwab, K9LA, in Fort Wayne, Indiana. We're pretty far west, but we're still in the Eastern time zone, so it's 8 o'clock here. Let me get this thing full screen, hopefully. Okay, it's full screen on my monitor, so I suppose it's good over everybody else there. So what I'm going to talk, okay, great. What I'm going to talk about tonight is the rulemaking 11953 and the petition, which is the petition from the Shortwave Modernization Coalition. I'm just going to do a general review of it. I'm not going to get into heavy details, technical details. All those details are in the many comments that are on the FCC webpage for this docket. So the first thing I want to do is thank a bunch of people here that helped put this whole presentation together. Ed Hare, W1RFI, he's the former ARRL lab manager. He had 37 years at the ARRL, and he called it quits in April. So he's enjoying his time off, I'm sure. But he came back to help in this area. He did the technical analysis for the ARRL comments that are on the FCC docket page. David Siddall, K3ZJ, he's our ARRL FCC counsel. He's the one that filed the comments, which include the technical analysis from Ed. George, W1GKS, he is the new ARRL lab manager, and he's getting used to all the activities there at headquarters. Kermit Carlson, W9XA, former ARRL Central Division Director. He and I've had many email exchanges about this subject and brought lots of good information to me. Greg Lappin, N9GL, he's the chair of the ARRL Safety Committee, and he's one of the people that put on great comments with heavy into the technical area. Also, another one that put on some great comments is the Dayton group, a bunch of hams, and they dug into it quite deeply. Alex, I won't pronounce his last name, I'll probably screw it up. He's with the Shortwave Solutions LLC, and he's got some really good comments too. Joel Harrison, I talked to him. He's the IARU secretary because I wanted to get inputs from the International Amateur Radio Union about do other countries are having this issue. Also Jurgen, N9RD, he got a great photo of the station in Wanata, Indiana. I've seen that station many times because I go right by it when I go to the Northwest Indiana DX Club meetings. And Brian, K9LA, he sent the picture of the Lockport, Illinois station, and we'll see those photos later on. Again, lots of good comments on there. So here's what we're going to talk about. What is Part 90? What are the proposed rule changes by the Shortwave Modernization Coalition? What did they evaluate in their petition? What are potential problems? And I have several images of a spectrum of one of these stations when it's transmitting. What an actual station looks like. Well, not the station, just the antennas. And some comments about RF exposure limits. We're required to be compliant with RF exposure limits, and they're also supposed to be compliant. Talk a little bit about what other countries are seeing in relation to this issue and where we're headed with this. So let's get started. Hopefully everyone realizes that amateur radio service is under Part 97 of the FCC rules. So what is Part 90? Well, it's titled Private Land Mobile Radio Service. To me, that's kind of misleading because when I hear the word land mobile, I think of radios that are in fire trucks, police cars, taxis, and all that kind of stuff. And indeed, Part 90 does cover VHF and UHF, but it also covers frequencies in the gigahertz range, and it does a little bit about 2 to 25 megahertz. That's what this petition is about. Just for reference, I threw out some other parts of the regulations. Part 80 is stations in the maritime services. Part 87 is aviation services. Part 95, personal radio services, FRS, GMRS, CB, and whatever else is out there. Part 96 is citizens broadband radio service up in the gigahertz range. There are lots of FCC rules, and it can be tough sometimes to find what you're looking for, at least probably because I don't do it enough. So here's what the existing Part 90 rules say. What emission types are allowed? That's paragraph 90.266. 2K80J3E, that's a 2.8 kilohertz single sideband and a 2.8 kilohertz bandwidth. There are two other waveforms which I'm not sure how important they are nowadays. One is AM telegraphy for oral reception, and it's on 100 hertz bandwidth. Also another one, telegraphy for machine reception. The one we're going to focus on is the single sideband in 2.8 kilohertz bandwidth. And we'll see what and the next bullet tells us what the rules are. The allowable power is 1,000 watts, which is plus 60 dBm, and that's PEP, peak envelope power. The other two waveforms, the power is considered and authorized on a case-by-case basis, or it's tied to the output power shown in the radio equipment list or the manufacturer's rated output power. Again, I'm just going to look at the 2.8 kilohertz single sideband. Okay, what's a spectral mask look like for this 2.8 kilohertz single sideband signal? Well, this upper right sketch is from the ARRL comments. In other words, the technical analysis done by Ed, W1RFI. And you can see that, of course, this is a narrow bandwidth, but it does require the emissions to be 73 dB below the full output power, 1,000 watts. What frequencies are allowed? Here's where things can get pretty interesting. This is in paragraph 2.106 of Part 2 of the FCC rules. Had to dig for that one to find it. But that 2.106, it talks about fixed and land mobile services from 2 to 25 megahertz. Now, here's a chart that Ed W1RFI put together of the amateur band frequencies on the left column, the frequencies allowed in Part 90 for private fixed band. And then he made a judgment on is it immediately adjacent. So the Part 90 can operate on a center frequency anywhere from 2000 to 2065 kilohertz, the top row. Now our 160 meter band is 1800 to 2000. So you can see they can be immediately adjacent. Now with a 3 kilohertz single sideband transmitter, that's probably not going to cause too much problem, especially just at 1,000 watts. It still could be an issue, but it's not like what we may see if the FCC allows the proposed changes by the Shortwave Modernization Coalition. Look at 20 meters. Our band, of course, is 1400 to 14350. One of their allocations is 13870 to 1400, or 14,000, 13870 to 14000. So they're immediately adjacent. They can be immediately adjacent, their center frequency. And you can see some of the other bands too. So that's what really the big problem is. So what does this mean? Well, here's the proposed rule, Part 90 rule changes proposed by the Shortwave Modernization Coalition. They want to add a new emission type, digital, up to 50 kilohertz wide. Okay. Remember, what's allowed now is 3 kilohertz wide. You want to increase the power from 1060 dBm to 20,000 watts plus 73 dBm. That's quite a bit. And what the most telling thing is, they want to add a unique spectral mask for their proposal. Now, the red line is the spectral mask proposed by the Shortwave Modernization Coalition. Compare that to the previous 2.8 kilohertz sideband spectral mask in blue. This plot also comes from the technical analysis by Ed W1RFI. You can see there's a world of difference. The ultimate rejection far out from the carrier is 23 dB worse than the mask for the 3 kilohertz sideband or 2.8 kilohertz. So that's a real heads up there, and that could be a problem. We'll see that a little later here in the slides. So what did they evaluate with this proposal? Well, they looked at signal levels at distant stations via ionospheric hops using VOACAP. They assumed 16 kW radiated, which is a 20 kW transmitter with a dB of coax loss. They assumed 10 dBi antenna gain, transmit antenna gain. And when we see some of the stations, or one of the stations, the one in Wanata, its total gain is probably around 20 dBi. So their assumption was about 10 dB low of what I think could happen. They looked at 3 phases over 3 phases of a solar cycle. They looked at 5 frequencies from 4.9 to 24.8 megahertz. They looked at the 4 seasons, summer, fall, winter, spring, 6 times during the day, and 4 different noise environments based on population density. So in other words, what that means is if you live in a heavily populated area, they assumed your noise environment was residential or even industrial. And those designations, residential, industrial, rural, quiet rural, come from the ITU noise document. So they did do a lot of evaluation, but only at distant stations. And what was their criteria for no interference? They said that if they added 35 dB of out-of-band suppression to their transmitter, the signal strength at a distant location, that should be distant, not distance, would most of the time be at or below the local noise level. So the local noise level, of course, depends on where you live, what the population density is in your area. And that's what their criteria was. And it came out looking pretty good. Now, of course, the question to ask is that a good criteria? Well, one thing you have to realize that if their interference is at the same level as your noise level, that means the noise floor is going to be raised 3 dB. Now, maybe that's not a problem on 10 meters when, you know, the signals are S9 plus 10, 20 dB. But as you go lower in frequency, it's going to be more of a problem, especially on 160 meters. They also ignored interference to our newer digital modes. In other words, the modes that can decode signals many dB below the noise floor. FT8 is a good example. And of course, WhisperNet, that could really be impacted by one of these stations, even at far distances. There are other potential problems that weren't really addressed. Interference to nearby receivers. So what if they pluck a station down near a ham radio guy? There's going to be some pretty large signals. They claim they never had any reports of interference, but I've seen comments in some of the FCC filings that that should be looked at again. Broadband noise, their broadband noise. I'm not sure what it is. It's going to depend on their transmitter design. It's something that at least should have been looked at. And of course, RF exposure limits. They didn't look at any of that. It's kind of obvious to me now, looking at all this, that some of the sites may be compliant, but some may not be. So that's an issue. And we'll see that in a later slide. So let's talk about examples to a nearby receiver. One of the first examples I saw came from N9GL's comments. And what he's plotted there on the upper right is typical sideband signal up on 20 meters. It's kind of hard to read that, but it's about minus 80 dBm. No, it's about minus 70 dBm or a little bit greater. So that's around S9. So that's the typical signal level on 20 meters. And if the station is nearby, the high-powered station is nearby, you can see the 50 dB down from the maximum is their proposed spectral mask, and it's going to just be a heck of a lot greater than what we would normally see on 20 meters. In fact, about 100 dB above S9 signals, which is going to be pretty big. There's also a comparative chart in the ARRL analysis, and it's on 160 meters. And what W1RFI plotted was the noise, the residential noise level. That's red. Now he's done it in terms of field strength. And then he also put on what a nearby station would be. For example, 3 miles away, it'd be about 90 dB above the residential noise floor. Now, the residential noise floor on 160 is about S8 per the ITU noise document. So 90 dB above S8, that's a big one. At 6 miles away, it's about 80 dB above the residential noise floor. So this is where the concern about interference to nearby receivers comes from. So Here's a spectrum of one of these stations. This is WI2XXG. It's an experimental station in the Chicago area in Maple Park. You can see this was taken off an SDR. The center frequency of that station is 14,365. So they're operating outside our band, our 20-meter band, 15 kilohertz away. But they've got a 20 kilohertz wide signal. And the spectral mask that's proposed by the Shortwave Modernization Coalition is shown as the yellow line. And you can see that that station kind of misses that spectral mask, but what's more important is right at the top of the band, their signal's only about 14 dB down at 14,350. So that's a problem. And as you go further down into the band, there's still a problem. So this interferes with the high end of 20 meters, the phone band, and of course 50 kilohertz bandwidth would be worse. And that spectrum plot comes from the Dayton Group comments. So here's an actual station, the one in Wanata, Indiana, WH2XWU. There's a gate there. It's in the middle of a farmer's field. There's a gate. It has the experimental license number, so you can go to the FCC website and look up all the details. And there's their antenna farm on the right. 2 towers. They're about pretty close to 50 meters tall. So that's pretty high. The top and bottom antennas on both towers are 15 element log periodics, and they're pointed towards the northeast, and they cover 14 to 20 megahertz, and they're M-squared antennas. So if you're familiar with M-squared, that's where they bought them. The middle antennas, one is pointed northwest, the one on the left. One is pointed northeast, the one on the right tower. They're only 10 element log periodics. And it looks like there's some lumps in the elements, which leads many of us to believe that those are loading coils. So these antennas are for frequencies lower than 14 megahertz. Don't know how much lower, but if we can figure out who made those antennas, it'd be easy to figure that out. Now, when I first saw this antenna system, my first thought was, boy, I'd love to have that on 20 meters, but oh well, that's not going to happen. But it's a pretty impressive site. We'll see a little bit more about it a little bit later here. So this brings me to the RF exposure limits. On the left is the Lockport, Illinois station that I mentioned way up front in this presentation. Image came from K9LA. You can see it's very close to a bunch of apartment buildings. And depending on the power, I'd be quite concerned about whether it's compliant with the exposure limits. Now there's the Wanata, Indiana picture from Google Earth. And what's quite obvious is they have a fence around their site. And it's of such a large area that a cursory calculation of the exposure, RF exposure, kind of looks okay. So somebody must have known what they're doing there and planned not to have someone get into the lobe of the antenna, the front lobe of the antenna, and be okay. What about other countries? Well, this comes from Alex comments. Canada. The new Canadian rules allow for digital systems on the same terms as previous analog single sideband systems. That's their current rules. Now, the proposed Canadian rules would permit a maximum of only 8 kilohertz of bandwidth and 350 watts of power, and prohibit 100% duty cycle operations. So Canada may be opening things up a bit, but not to the extent of 20 kilowatts and 50 kilohertz wide digital signals. In Japan, the coalition members have applied for similar regulation in Japan. The proceedings began in December 2022, and they're still ongoing. The coalition members proposed 10 kilowatts and a 12 kilohertz bandwidth. And with the emission mask that limits out-of-band emissions to 56 dB. So that's a little bit better than the mask that they're proposing for the US. The coalition members also discussed frequency separation to the maritime and aviation stations of the center frequency only being at least 31.5 kilohertz from the band edges of those two services. So it looks like they're trying to accommodate a little bit, but I'm not sure 31.5 kilohertz would be enough for a 50 kilohertz wide 20 kW station. So there are things going on in Canada and Japan. That's the only thing I'm aware of. So we'll see what happens. Now, there were 815 comments on the rulemaking 11.953. I certainly haven't read them all. Most appear to be from hams and mention interference. As I said up front, there are some that went deeper into the technical issues. N9GL, the Dayton Group, the ARRL, Alex, and another example is Fred, W9KEY, and I saw he was here on this website, on this presentation. If I miss some of yours, well, I'm sorry about that, but well, that's a lot of stuff to read. Now, if you just want to read some comments, at least read the above 5, N9GL's, Dayton Group, ARRL, Alex's, and Fred's. And you'll gain a heck of a lot of information. Now, one thing I found in Alex's comments was his paragraph 4.1.5. And that really stood out to me. And his conclusion is not, after he analyzed everything, is not only are the requested powers, 20 kilowatts, far in excess of what is theoretically necessary to achieve the petition's business objectives. There is practical evidence to prove that the requested power is grossly excessive. Now, Alex has designed and built and manages a link between Chicago and London that has the lowest latency link on this route. And his design uses 16 kilohertz of bandwidth, not 50. So that's where he claims 3 orders of magnitude. Well, I'm not sure that's right, but three orders of magnitude more spectrally efficient than the petition's proposal. There is a good example of far lower impact that can be had with lower power and narrower bandwidths, and it's based on an actual link that's from Chicago to London. So that stands out, and I hope the FCC reads that one. So where are we headed here? Well, the comment filing period is over. The next step is notice of proposed rulemaking that the FCC will issue. When will that happen? They don't have a good history. The FCC doesn't have a good history of addressing amateur radio stuff. There's a backlog of bills in the FCC, and we've had to go to Congress to try and get senators and representatives signed up to put a bill out from the Congress that says FCC do something. So we're not really enthusiastic or optimistic about something happening quickly. I don't know what else to say. Joel Harrison, the IARU secretary, he advises that the agenda for the World Radio Communications Conference 27, that's in 2027, is in development. And he would not be surprised to see this issue come up, especially if RM 11953 gains traction in the US. WRC 23 is coming up in November in Dubai, but the agenda has already been set and it does not include this issue. So in 2027, things may be all over with. So, and that's all I had. So Bob or Kevin, if there are any questions, I can try and answer, but hopefully it gave a good general picture of their petition, what they're asking for, and where we see some of the problems occurring.
No, that was really a great overview of it. And, you know, you mentioned that the FCC is slow to react. For amateur radio stuff, might they be faster to react with all the lobbyists that this organization might be able to bring to bear?
Yeah, money talks, there's no doubt about it. And that's one of the disadvantages that we have is our lobby generally can't compare with multi-million-dollar companies. So, yes, we could have a problem.
Question?
But that's a pretty radical change, though, and I'd be surprised if eventually they maybe back off, and maybe that's why the proposed limits are so high and wide, because they figured they'd have to get reduced.
Yeah, Fred, go ahead.
There were two extensions filed for a 30-day extension for additional comments, and that was turned down by the FCC. How much should we read into that, Carl? Is that a serious matter, or is it just a procedural thing that we expected?
I don't know. I'm not really up on what the FCC does. Unfortunately, our FCC counsel, K3ZJ, he's in Denmark right now. His wife is Danish. And he's kind of out of contact. And those are some great questions that I'd like to ask him, because he worked at the FCC, and that's why he's our FCC counsel now. I don't know what that means. Maybe they just wanted to get it over with. And when they saw the magnitude of the number of proposals, they said, okay, that's probably enough. We don't need any more.
Question, Carl.
Sure.
I read through the proposal and it sounded to me like the testing was all narrow band, and they have not yet implemented the 50 kilohertz wide stuff. Is that a true understanding, or have they been using the wide band as well as the narrow band?
Kermit, W9XA, is going to some of the sites in the Chicago area. Hopefully they're on, and he'll get videos with his spectrum analyzer. The only thing I'm aware of right now is that mask, or the spectral performance from the Maple Park, Illinois station. It was only 20 kilohertz wide. So
they're running narrow band for their tests, and then proposing to widen that out once they get a license.
Well, what's narrow band? Is 20 kilohertz narrow band compared to 50? I don't know. It could be. Like the Wanata station. If you go in and look at the frequencies they propose to work on, they do have some 50 kilohertz channels. Now, again, I don't know if they actually used them or not.
This all seems like kind of a transient sort of technology. Do you suppose they're going to go to spread spectrum soon, which would really alleviate all of these issues?
Yeah, I don't know.
I
If
mean, just
anybody out there can add any comments, that'd be great.
Question, please.
Sure.
Thank you, Carl. Tom, N2AXX in Northern New Jersey. Some
Mhm.
overlapping things here. Did the NTIA, that is, I believe, part of the Department of Commerce and works closely with DOD, did they weigh in on this at all? I haven't seen any comment, and I'm also wondering, let's take the 14,350 megahertz butting right up against the amateur spectrum. I have not seen them talk about any kind of a guard band, which is very common in the UHF band, 700, 900 megahertz, where cellular and public safety coexist. And the other thing was, there's a lot of things here that are a little fuzzy. The bandwidth, their throughput, and the modulation schemes that they intend to use. I wonder if any of this bubbles up any thoughts. The NTIA, the guard band, the modulation scheme, and bandwidth. Great job. Thank you.
Okay, you're welcome. Thank you. I saw something about the NTIA, but I don't remember what it was.
Okay.
Unfortunately, guard bands. Well, it looks like they proposed a guard band in Japan. Yeah, there it is, the bottom bullet in the Japan section. So I don't know why they didn't propose something like that for us versus Japan.
Yeah.
Don't know. And the what was the other one? The question?
The modulation schemes that
yeah.
are going to be related to the bandwidth required, and if they're going to use a pulsed modulation scheme, in other words, is it going to return to zero and go back to peak power, which would tend to make the signal more apt to splatter, the pulsation, if you will.
Yeah. Well, I saw a preliminary spectrum from Kermit, and it looks like there were lots of noise, but 1 second pulses.
Okay.
A lot of, well, I know I looked at the Wanata license, and they gave modulation details, but others have claimed, on their experimental license, they claimed it's proprietary or confidential or whatever.
Exactly. That's what I'm saying.
And who says everybody's going to use the same modulation? Don't know.
Yeah, it's all very fuzzy. Thank you for your
Yes.
consideration.
Yeah, but you might, we'll have to wait and see what happens, I guess.
Carl, you have Canada and Japan. I
Yep.
think one of the targets for these high frequency, no pun intended, traders is London. So do we know where the UK is? And I guess we have to also ask the EU on this.
Yeah, I asked Joel, W5ZN, the IARU secretary, and he's not aware of anything bubbling up over in Europe. So I really can't say anything. Japan, but probably Tokyo, right? More than likely. And there's going to be a lot of these. They could probably do a lot of this with almost with the existing rules. And not worry about. I don't know why they need, so much power. I guess it's for all the conditions of the solar cycle and the seasons and the time of day and all that.
A question, please.
Sure.
It's W2JC. Do you know if this is one-way transmission or are they going to have 20 kilowatts coming from the target countries also?
I've wondered about that too, and I've never seen that mentioned. I don't know.
If it's one way, they must have very good data correction to, I mean, these people have already spent hundreds of millions of dollars on these experimental stations.
Yes.
And they're going to be trading probably billions of dollars in microseconds.
Yes.
Well, I think if they're going to be trading, by that definition, it's going to be two-way, even regardless of error correction. They get the information, they analyze it, they have to place the trades. And so I would guess this would be, I don't know, full duplex is the right terminology or whatever. Oh,
But
I see. Alex is texting in that it's one-way, not two-way.
Okay,
Is
good.
there anything that would prevent two-way? I mean, running two different channels.
Yeah, they could probably do it.
So far, all the tests have been domestic USA,
As far as I'm aware, yes.
Chicago to New York and Chicago to Los Angeles.
Well, there are stations around the US, but I've not looked at the details of all of them.
It seems like most of the experimental ones are around Chicago.
Yeah, going to the
Okay.
Northeast, which suggests either New York or maybe even London.
I understand they're either building or have built one right near Wayne, New Jersey.
Yes, I did, in one of the comments, I saw a map of the US with these stations. And they're mostly in the Northeast and a little bit here in the Midwest, but there's some others scattered around.
One of the caveats is the Wayne one is within rock throwing distance of a large university
Yep,
with 20 kilowatts of RF.
yep. You gotta worry about that.
Alex just put a comment that he said there's one in Iowa and he can explain. Alex, do you not have audio?
Do I? Can y'all hear me?
Yes.
Oh, all right. Right. So there is a microwave going from Chicago towards Seattle, and it ends in Iowa. It's a overbuild of a some of the path from Chicago to Seattle to reduce the latency. So it wasn't built all the way. It's only built like 300 miles. But that's where the origin of one of the stations is.
Okay. I see Tony, KX1G had a question. Were there any comments filed by national associations other than the ARRL? I haven't read everything, so I don't know.
There were none. I read everything. The problem was there were no comments by NTIA, which is the main thing that FCC cared about. For example, the letter from 55 astronomers carries no weight because FCC has no idea who those 55 astronomers are. The proper procedure is astronomers go through their respective institutions to the astronomy spectrum coordinators, who goes to National Science Foundation, who goes to NTIA, and NTIA says no. So the process is very important here, and so far there has not been anything from any institution that FCC actually cares about.
Alex, why don't you explain the Iowa station?
I think I just did. I mean, the purpose is to get closer to Seattle
Yeah.
And because basically if you transmit it from Chicago, that's quite a long way. So
Yeah.
you want to get a little bit closer.
A little
But
bit.
you also don't want to take fiber all the way to Seattle and transmit from Seattle because that incurs latency. So Iowa is where there is an existing microwave link from Chicago to Iowa,
Mhm.
where it connects to the fiber link to Seattle.
Okay.
So that was done about 8 years ago, I guess, for some of the trading firms, some of the usual suspects, the same coalition, to be faster going to Tokyo rather, because they would take partial microwave path to Iowa and then take the fiber.
Okay. Wally asked if is there going to be frequency hopping, and I believe the answer is they will use the best frequency, which I'm sure they're going to be checking the frequencies and using the one that has the best results.
There is frequency changing, but it's not quite the same as what you would call frequency hopping.
Hopping.
Not FHSS. That's not exactly what this is.
Yeah, there's some.
Is the Canadian change for the same purpose for gaining this 30 milliseconds for stock traders? Is that what our rules are being changed for, or is this just a common thing that all countries are doing?
Yes and no. Some of that is because of the digital users, not necessarily HFT related. Some of it from that as well.
It seems pretty crazy for a 30 millisecond advantage, but I guess I'm not a stock trader, so I don't know.
Yeah, there's probably lots of money involved too.
Yeah.
The amount of money, I think, is exaggerated in this case, as in I can say that it's less than $1 million to construct any of all of this kind of things. So we're talking about hundreds of thousands, definitely not hundreds of millions.
Carl, since the comment period has closed and the extensions to the comment period have been denied, is there anything the ham radio community can do at this point to further our position?
Well, remember I mentioned there were 815 comments. On another page, there are 817, which were filed after the date. So you could probably still send something in, but it may not be relevant because it's past the date.
So slight correction. So the way it works is comments. There is a deadline for comments, but there is a separate deadline for replies. People can reply to a comment. You're not supposed to raise a new argument, but you can reply to an existing comment and say, I agree or disagree with that. We can reply to, like, you can list all the comments that you are replying to and say what you disagree, what you agree with. So there is still time for both amateurs and institutions to get involved. And there is no requirement that somebody who is replying must have previously commented.
The other thing is that the next step, as Carl mentioned, is the notice of proposed rulemaking. That's not the proposed rule. That's yet another step. So there'll be another comment round with maybe a narrowing of what the commission is entertaining. And, you know, that's going to be very important, I think, for for the community to reply, but also for outreach to members of Congress.
Yep. There's some other questions in there, but I don't think I'm qualified to answer. What about interference to MRI machines? Yeah. What else?
Carl, you made a couple of comments earlier about the other countries. You have that page up right now.
Sure.
What I was wondering is the Modernization Coalition, did they make the same proposal to Canada, Japan that they did to the United States? And have those telecommunications agencies negotiated in some way to show that why their requirements are somewhat different than what being proposed?
That's a good question. Maybe Alice can help answer that. As I understand it, the coalition members did go to Japan, but it's not clear to me that they're the ones that did Canada. Maybe Alex knows.
The Canada, I think some of them were involved, but I don't really have any proof because there is not that much detail about what happened in Canada. In Japan, I don't really read Japanese well, so with help of machine translation, it's not clear whether there was a negotiation or this is what they got. But there is what I see is 10 kilowatt and 12 kilohertz, something like that. And it's also in Japan, as I understand, it is not final. It is like they have slightly different systems, so it is a subcommittee approval, but it's not committee approval. So it's a little bit different.
Yeah, I was wondering that there could be just a difference in the way it's filed, the way the comments are done. But my point was that it did show some, see, these are less restrictive on our part. Not that they're acceptable, but there is a difference. So it's something's going on there, which I suppose is kind of positive, but I don't know to what extent. I know that it's different. That's all.
Just as a comment, I used to work on HF radio teletype circuits, and I'm curious to see how selective fading is going to affect this type of signal reception.
It's not like the systems that are built with sufficient diversity that, well, at least I built mine. I don't know about others, but it's people who are doing this more or less know what they're doing. They all know that the coalition is incompetent because all of the members of coalition have competing interests. Therefore, they didn't share with coalition anything they know. So this resulted in coalition kind of going on its own to find a FCC report firm and resulted in such a terrible supplemental report. But each individual member of coalition, they know a lot better than that.
Okay. Brad had a question. Are there any members of Congress that are known to be favorable to amateur radio? Yes, there sure are. The ARRL's Legislative Advocacy Committee is working with Congress, senators and representatives, to make sure that a bill can move forward in Congress that orders the FCC to do something about the existing backlog of stuff. So there are Congress people that are favorable ham radio. In fact, there's there are some that are ham radio operators too, so that really helps.
Comment?
Yes, go ahead, please.
This is Van W2DLT in Pennsylvania. Just a basic question. Ham radio is moving toward narrower bandwidth with FT8. Why are these guys using so much of the spectrum when they're running so much power? Why can't they use a narrower bandwidth and get better coverage just as we do? Over.
Alex?
I mean, they can. They don't want to.
Remember,
Why reduce when you can ask for more? Why use 1,000 watt when you can use 20,000 watts?
yeah, there might be a,
And I think they also have, they're moving a whole lot more data per second than what we do with FT8. So I'm not certain whether it's 1,000 times more or 10,000 times more. So, you know, at some point you need, you know, more bandwidth to move more data.
yep.
Well, that makes sense, but you know, we've lived with the big worldwide stations in the middle of 40 meters. And as powerful as they are, they don't bother us as much as apparently this might bother us. Why is that? Why can't we coexist?
Well, I can remember my novice days with Radio Moscow. Remember now, they're only about 6 kilohertz wide. And I could not use 1 or 2 of my crystals because that was right under Radio Moscow. And they were strong enough to really make a mess. I'm sure their ERP was probably higher than the, well, I don't know. I have to look at that.
The ham radio data modes are so slow that
Yes.
it's not a comparison, I think.
Yeah. Yep.
Carl, question. In ARRL's spectrum of things to do, what's the priority on this? Is this something that they're really going to fight and go to the mat on, or is this just one of 100 things that are being worked on? Are they going to try to round up a lot of their members in a letter writing campaign? You know, I think people are kind of struggling. Where do you go from here, and who's doing what, and is there something individuals can do?
We're just gonna have to wait to see what the FCC does with their, if and when they issue an NPRM. But I think we'll go heavy after it. It's very important to us. A lot of people want our HF frequencies, and we certainly don't want to give them up. But I think we're going to have to wait to see what the NPRM says. And like I mentioned, you know, we're working with Congress people. So hopefully that will grease the skids if we need to do something here on this problem.
Maybe one more thing in favor of things not moving quick. I believe the FCC is operating with 4 rather than 5 commissioners. So 2 Republicans, 2 Democrats, and they've had trouble agreeing on the time of day.
Yep.
So,
yep.
Other questions for Carl or Alex or Fred or anyone else?
I just saw a note from Ed, W1RFI, and he said he's working on reply comments and will be continuing a full court press on more technical analysis and site visits to the New Jersey station. So we're going to keep going as much as we can. There are a lot of stations, and we don't have a lot of data on what they look like spectrum wise. So I think we need just need to take a lot of data and see what's going on.
I have a question. Has anybody heard anything about, like, let's say AT&T weighing in on this?
I've not heard anything. Alex, do you have any comments on that? Maybe?
Why would AT&T be involved?
Competition. Network competition.
Not the same ballpark, not the same game, sorry.
Okay, Ed says AT&T did not comment, so.
Question, please.
Sure.
Okay, what percentage of day or night will this be in operation? Thank you, Carl.
Well, they say they want to cover 2 to 25 megahertz. So, you know, when a kind of low part of a solar cycle, that means the lower frequencies are going to be have to be used maybe during the day, but at night also. So.
Yeah, and trading is
Yep.
24 hours a day.
Yep. Yep. Finance centers follow the sun. And Ed says in an international market, time is irrelevant. So they're going to have to use a bunch of frequencies depending on the conditions.
Well, Carl, another comment, W9MXQ.
Mm-hmm.
Going back to the subject of our senators and representatives, I'm pretty regular on keeping in contact with them.
Yep.
It would be helpful if the league could let us know what we need to say when. I mean, I think I'll make some comments now, but it would be good to have some kind of a way to address them, to give them the proper information.
Talking points.
Yes, that's it, talking points. I think that would be very helpful.
Yeah. Yes, it would.
So just kind of keep that in mind. I mean, we can do off on our own, but maybe a more concentrated effort would be even better.
Yeah. I'd have to talk to David Sadal about that. He's the kind of the guy that's going to determine a lot of what we should do and when, because of his experience working at the FCC. But I think we're, as Ed has commented, we're going to really do a lot more data taking so we can understand the whole thing better. Yep, we should be loud. Newspapers, journals, social media. Yep. Yep.
Well, I think people are really sensitive to the RF emission issue. We can't overdo it because we don't want that to come down on our heads, but I think that's a major item that we need to build on.
Yep.
Carl, there's obviously other services that are represented in the spectrum besides just the amateur radio bands.
Right.
Do they carry more clout, and are they commenting? Are they worried? Or again, there has to be other services sandwiched in there that potentially can be affected.
Yeah, there's aviation. The internet, flying from North America to Europe, that's HF.
Yeah.
So there are other services that could have a problem, not just us. But I have not looked at all 815 comments or 817. And so there could be some comments in there from other services. Or maybe they're not aware of it.
It's a little, sorry.
No, go ahead, Alex.
We put it this way, the services, as in the military services or tactical users, and they are working on this, but the timelines are such that it hasn't happened yet, or at least this is what I gather from conversations with people involved in HF GCS. I'll put it this way, as soon as they say something, as soon as the defense users talk to the NTIA, and NTIA says, yeah, no, this thing is dead. Like this is, you know, it could be 1 million amateurs versus one comment from NTIA and so on. So, you know, that's kind of the good part of this. The bad part, you know, whenever NTIA gets around to it. And but it also, you know, the good part is that NTIA is not, I mean, they're kind of bound by the same rules, but NTIA has sort of parallel jurisdiction to FCC. So if NTIA says no way, FCC will not proceed this, whatever it is. And the NTIA's constituency, NTIA represents federal users. So that includes Department of Defense, FEMA, every user. So, and generally both organizations cooperate, and I was very surprised to see that NTIA did not chime in. But as I understand, that's because you know, timelines, somebody dropped the ball.
Yeah, Ed, W1RFI says that other services did not comment, but this is typical. ARRL is very often the only player at the table from this sort of thing to industry standards work. So,
Another question, please.
sure. Go ahead.
This is W2JC again. These are all, I presume, fixed land stations. And I presume the experimental licenses had to specify specific frequencies that they worked on.
Yes, they did.
Does anybody know what those specific frequencies were and how close they are to our band edges?
I've looked at the experimental license for that Wanata, Indiana, and it lists all the frequencies, but I did not check to see how close they were to band edges. Ed, W1RFI, any comments on that?
One of the tables in your slides that talked about over band edge interference seemed to pick their transmitting frequencies very close to the edge of our bands. I'm wondering if one thing that we should push is to get them assigned channels that are far enough away from us.
Yep. Yeah.
Carl, someone raised the issue about dollars, and I was going to ask about that. And, you know, for the cellular frequencies and others, the FCC has been able to hold, you know, very competitive bidding auctions. I'm wondering if this part of the spectrum is going to go up for auction, and is that also a threat possibly for our part of the spectrum? I mean, I know we're getting ahead of ourselves here, but it just seems like these guys are asking for something for free, and others have had to pay for it in recent years.
I don't know what the FCC is thinking. So
This spectrum is not FCC's to sell, to put it this way. FCC can sell line of sight spectrum, something where there is no interference to other countries. But by the ATU treaties, this kind of stuff, if it goes across the border, then that's now in ITU's jurisdiction. I mean, FCC wouldn't quite be so blatant to sell the spectrum. So no.
Well, very, very good point, Alex, but I would never put it past someone in Washington to try to sell something, even if it wasn't theirs. But you raise an interesting question. You mentioned the international regulator, but they seem to be nowhere in sight. And once these licenses are granted, those signals are not going to stay within our borders.
Well, we are still very far away from licenses being granted. We are still at the petition for rulemaking, not the rulemaking itself. So certainly, first of all, I think that this petition, even if it becomes a rulemaking, this is not going to pass, and it's just it's a matter of time before one of these users interferes. One of HFT users interferes with a armed, put it this way, armed service, and at that point, the game is over. Like there is no chance for this petition to pass. And given how much of spectrum they're using, I think it's just a matter of time for that to happen. So, and as far as the regulators, HF is a very unique kind of thing. So even within FCC, there is not that much competency about HF. When you talk about other countries, the same applies. So some of them had no idea, they probably have no idea, and some of them no idea that this happened. Some of them have no idea what HF is. And some of them have internal processes to follow which don't fit into the 30-day rule. So, I'm holding my fingers crossed that there will be something happening from the international regulators' position.
Thanks. All very good points. One real quick question, if they were close, how would we know what woodpeckers sound like and so forth. Is this just the noise floor goes up because it's digital and it's broad spectrum? Is there any way of, identifying that, someone is getting interference, whether it be the Department of Defense or amateur radio operators?
Well, it seems to me that your explanation that the noise floor goes up is probably the correct one. I mean, if it's a large increase in the noise floor, I'm sure you'll notice it. What if your noise floor only goes up several dB? Will you notice it? Well, on the low bands, probably 10 meters around, with a good solar cycle around the maximum, you probably won't even know it. So, yeah, I think unless someone else has another comment, seems to me it would be the noise floor rise. So that's a good reason, maybe, we should document what we have in our station, take a noise floor measurement, and just keep it in your back pocket. And then as things go along, see if things are changing. And just like, you know, jot down the SWR on all your antennas and check it every once in a while, see if anything changes. That may help show a problem, and that very well could help in this issue too.
Any other questions or comments for Carl or
anybody?
Fred or Alex?
Carl, one last comment. When I read the initial proposal, they claimed no known instances of interference had been recorded.
That's right.
And as you're talking about now, I'm not sure that I would have known what the interference was had it affected me.
Yeah, you could have thought of something in the house, right?
Sure. Or if you're saying the noise floor goes up, well, the noise floor goes up and down all the time. So if it's an offending station that you can identify by their transmission, well, you know, we all hear the shortwave guys and we know when they're on, but this might be something that ARRL could educate amateurs about. How do we identify that this particular thing is interfering with us?
Yeah.
Maybe some examples of if you can record it from a nearby location and tell us, well, what does it sound like? What should I look for?
Yeah.
Do I tune off band to try to find, you know, the center of their transmission?
I believe there's videos and audios on the ARRL website about different noise sources, but of course it probably doesn't include these. I would assume that if there's going to be a problem, it's going to be because there's a ham near one of these stations. And I think that one will be quite obvious. If you're farther, you know, or if you're over in Europe, you may not notice it that much.
Any other questions, comments? I think Carl, having hams start recording noise floor levels or things like this is something which would be good, and it'd be great to get some technical support as to how to best do it, how frequently to do it, so that if we do have problems in the future, we have some basis to measure it from.
Yeah. Alex, before you go, W0GJ asked, where is that station in Iowa? Uh-oh, he might have left already.
Yeah, he signed off in the
Oh,
chat,
okay.
I think.
Well, I'll send him an email, and Glenn, I'll send you an email. I don't know, maybe it's near you. Who knows?
A comment?
Yes.
Maybe it's slightly facetious, but in the early days of RTTY and FT8 and some of the other digital modes we had to use, we had to identify our station call sign by Morse code.
I was just thinking that.
Maybe we should urge the proposed rule makers to require that.
Well, there's, I think, of course, part 97 says we have to identify, and I think part 90 says they have to identify too, but I'm not sure it's something that's easy to decode. Or, you know, it's not voice or anything like that. So,
Well, with the current regulations, things like FT8 don't have to identify in an audibly identified way. And they will, I'm sure, insist the same thing. They'll send their ID as part of their data, and none of us will know how to decode it.
Seems like they're doing an awful lot of work here for something that they'll never be able to get 5 nines out of in the short term. And this, they're going to have backup systems. it'd be interesting to see if this can really work, you know, when it counts all the time.
Well, this has been going on for 5 or 6 years on the experimental, because I remember 5 years or so ago, some of the chat streams were talking about these stations being built in Mahwah, New Jersey, and the Chicago environs and stuff like that. And then the discussion went quiet for several years, and now it's popped up because of the proposed rulemaking.
Yeah, so I think it works. They do certainly have backup. They have fiber, microwave, copper, there's satellite, there's lots of backup. But again, this is to give them the edge over their competitors. And I guess we need to stay tuned, you know, see when and if the FCC puts out an advance notice of proposed rulemaking. And as Carl pointed out, it's a slow, tedious process. There'll be a little more meat on the bone because we'll be seeing the FCC's kind of first take as to how they think it should come out. And we'll have rounds of that. And assuming it moves beyond that, there'll be the proposed rule itself. So it's going to be a long haul. And, you know, coming from a past lobbying background, don't wait to get to know your member of Congress. You don't have to talk to them about this. You can talk to them about all kinds of other things, but getting to know your member of Congress, building some relationship with their offices in your state or in the district are just good things to do, not only for amateur radio, but for other things you may be interested in. So that's my government relations, you know, public announcement. So Carl, any final comments for us?
No, I just appreciate everyone asking questions and piping up, because they probably know a lot more than I do about this whole thing. Hopefully my summary kind of gets you on board to what's going on. That's all I have to say, Kevin.
Thanks, Carl, and thanks for you know, allowing us to rally around the flag.
Okay.
We really appreciated you jumping on this and very quickly agreeing to have this discussion. And you know, I don't want to say I look forward to seeing the next stage of this, but it's something that I think we all need to be watching and paying attention to, and we look forward to hearing more from ARRL. So with that, I want to special thanks to Carl and Alex and Fred and everyone. Good evening.
Okay, bye-bye.
Thank you, Madison DX Club.